The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, this is Michelle Giorgiani from MapGeo, and thanks for joining the webinar. We're gonna wait a couple more minutes while we have more attendees joining, and we'll get started in a couple minutes. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining the MapGeo webinar on how to communicate value and increase your GIS budget. My name is Michelle Giorgiani, and I am going to introduce our other presenters. We have Kate Hickey, Jessica Chen, David Breeding, and of course myself. Just a little logistics. We will have some time towards the end to respond to any of your questions. So definitely feel free to pop your questions right into the panel on the GoTo webinar pane that you should have on your screen. And we'll get to those towards the end. Now I'll hand it off to begin our presentation. Thanks again, everybody.
All right. Hello, everybody. This is Kate. I'm going to start talking a little bit about return on investment. When we talk about communicating the value of your GIS program, we really need to start with how to truly assess the value of your program or the value of any investment you're looking to make. A return on investment study can be a great way to calculate this, quantify it, and demonstrate it and present it in an objective way to decision makers in a way that they will appreciate and a way that they'll understand. The term ROI, return on investment, gets thrown around a lot, but it's really fairly straightforward. It's basically a calculation weighing the costs and benefits of any decision or investment or program or potential purchase. And in the end, it's really as simple as if the benefits outweigh the costs, then that investment decision is a good one. An ROI study can be done as a formal process by a consultant. We'll describe an example of this later on. It's often the case, perhaps at the state level when millions of dollars are being invested. But it can also be done simply by any of you, and we're going to give you a quick peek into some of that process. So quantifying the costs, that's really where you start. And quantifying those costs is really the easy part. They tend to be very tangible, easier to calculate. We're looking at the invoices that you all see in your inboxes there for hardware, for software license fees, for for rent, for salaries, all of those very tangible, quantifiable costs. And even as hardware and software move to the cloud, these costs are even more predictable and easy to calculate out over time. If we look at quantifying the benefits, that's where things get a little bit more challenging. And I think this is where we all struggle. The benefits tend to be harder to quantify. We're talking about time saved or dollars saved, or even a costly mistake being avoided. In an ROI study, the process is really to gather solid examples of how people are saving time, saving money, maybe improving the decision-making process, and then attaching a real value, a quantifiable value to that. So, for example, if having access to aerial imagery through the GIS or Google Street View, if that allows an inspector to spend 4 fewer hours in the field each week because they can do some preview work, looking at their computer using the GIS. If they're taking those 4 hours and you calculate those hours at a fully loaded rate, the rate with benefits, if that rate were $40 an hour, the annual savings for that activity alone, just having access to aerial imagery or street view imagery, is over $8,000. So if you think about what you're spending on your GIS program, and then just that single example of the benefits that it's providing to one person, you can begin to see how you can quantify these quantified benefits can really begin to add up. But once you've assessed that value and you begin to build up that case, what you really need to think about is how you're going to communicate that. I think it's important that you know your audience. You've done the hard part. You've quantified and articulated the value of your program or your proposed investment. And now you need to shift your attention to how you're going to make the case for it. And this is, perhaps where you turn into a bit of a salesperson. I think in the many years I've worked in this industry, often the most successful GIS managers are the ones that are good salespeople selling the value of their program. They're not always the most technical people, but they're the ones who can talk about that value. In general, technical folks are not always the best advocates for investment. We tend to focus on the technical details, and it can be difficult to translate those. So, you could be talking about geocoding your data, but does the mayor of your organization know what that means or what that does for him or for her? So these are just some simple guidelines to keep in mind when approaching a return on investment study, or just simply trying to advocate for continued investment. Speak their language, identify your very specific goals, and definitely keep it simple. In thinking about your audience and the case you're trying to make, to whom are you speaking? Who is it that's going to be making this decision? Is it the selectmen in your town? Is it town council? Is it something that citizens are voting on? Is it local business people that you are trying to demonstrate the GIS capabilities to? What do they care about and how technical are they? Do they allocate budget? Do they set priorities? Do they do both of these things? What are the priorities of the leadership in your organization? Is it about providing transparency, providing access to government information? If that's the high priority, speak when you're communicating the value, put the GIS in the context of a tool or a platform that can help provide that transparency. Is it about streamlining workflows? What's been in the papers lately? Is it about inefficiencies, or is it about wasted overtime, what are ways that the GIS can help streamline those workflows so that you can help make your leaders look good? And I think, using the words that will get the intention of those executive leaders is really important. Instead of talking about the technical terms, talk about revenue or risk or budget allocation. I mean, these are the terms that have an impact and can be quantified. For those that are their daily life is about managing that budget and making sure that they look like they are managing the operations of the city or town efficiently. It's key for them to be able to understand how the GIS serves their overall goals there. And be concise and specific about your goals. If you are asking for GIS money, tie it to specific activities that are gonna benefit from this. Demonstrate how staff and citizens are currently using the system, how it's become a part of their daily existence, how it's become integrated into their daily workflows, and describe those anticipated outcomes and the benefits. Requesting funding just because your department has done so and you're just asking for that level funding, it's not always a great compelling use case for them. Focusing on those benefits, instead of the telling them more about mobile technology or database schemas or feature level metadata or even software as a service, all these terms that they're hearing in an IT context, translating that to, if you fund this, you and your citizens are going to have 24-hour access to quality maps. Perhaps it helps demonstrate that we are a progressive community that embraces technology. Is that helping promote their case as a leader? Or with this tool, your staff can update the site themselves and reduce counter traffic and phone calls to a particular department. That certainly saves overtime pay, saves that time spent addressing questions. Or, even in addressing regulatory demands. So if this project will fill, for instance, 4 out of 8 of the steps in complying with this particular regulation, does that reduce the city or town's need for consulting costs? So those specifics really help make your case. And I'm going to talk about just quickly go through sort of how we came up with the return on investment number and made the case for the state of Vermont in investing in statewide parcels. So the problem was really that most Vermont municipalities had parcel data, but it was not developed to a consistent level. Just like many other New England states, parcel data was managed at the local level or not managed, as the case may be. And it was difficult for anyone who was interested in sort of cross-boundary use cases to get the data that they needed. So the state GIS organization decided that they were going to pursue a return on investment study and contracted with us to follow these key steps. And these, I am talking about a state use case here, but it's the same formula, doing it at the local level or doing it, up at the national level. It's really about identifying the use cases, how are people using the data and what do they want to be doing with the data. Talking to those specific stakeholders, those people that do have their hands in it and those who have questions that they want to be able to answer. It's going through that process of calculating the benefits. So, if you had access, in this case, to parcels at a regional or state level, how much time would it save you? And then calculating that out based on salaries or other very quantifiable assumptions there. And then really doing the math. Do the benefits outweigh the costs? benefits. You know, when you scale that up across all the people that are benefiting from that investment, what is the outcome? So we talked to people all across the state about how they were currently using the parcel data, and we heard so many use cases, you know, and they're very applicable at the local level too. You know, in economic development, parcel data in communities that had it, it was helping them provide accurate and really comprehensive site selection. So new businesses were coming to those communities because they had parcel data. And it wasn't, it made them visible. They suddenly were on the radar of those businesses. And it helped them compete with nearby states or nearby communities with for new businesses. So, you know, Vermont has been economically depressed in recent years, and they saw parcel data as a way to really turn around their economic situation. In terms of parcels, we're also helping identify encroachment for open space or forest preservation, seeing where private landholders were slowly but surely taking over those open spaces and taking that land away from the public good. Or in stormwater management, supporting asset management, or even helping with dispute resolution. And then, of course, in public safety, it's been demonstrated time and time again that parcel data and owner information related to that parcel data certainly helps in emergency response, you know, right there in the moment in evacuation planning, but also in disaster recovery, understanding which properties were hit and how widespread a disaster was. It can be a key aspect in terms of getting funding to help with disaster recovery. So in Vermont, we took all of these use cases and plugged in the numbers, basically had a ton of spreadsheets here. And in the end, we did the math and came out with a very positive ROI. So we take all those spreadsheets, and the end story was that the return on investment was between 1.5 times to 4.5 times the cost of statewide parcels. And translated into dollars, that ends up being between $6 and almost $13 million of benefit over 5 years. So the VCGI, the state GIS agency, took this to decision makers, and it was the decision was made unanimously that they were going to invest in this program, and we are in year 2. The state is in year 2 of implementing this program right now. So, you know, really the take-home message for all of you is that following these steps to build a solid case for your investment can really pay off. You know, it's hard for decision makers to argue with objective numbers, and it's going to give them a new appreciation for how far-reaching the benefits are now, or how far-reaching they will be with a particular investment. So David and Jessica are going to talk about a few other examples for increasing your ROI. So I'll hand it over.
Thanks a lot, Kate. Yeah, it's just been really interesting, I think, from my perspective in project management, working with many customers. I'm often involved in trying to help them provide a lot of value. And so, you know, MapGeo has been an amazing resource to kind of leverage on the visualization side of things. But when I think about you know, a problem, or I think about how can we create some value from some source information, I really start classifying it. And so, you know, these are some classifications that I've used to kind of isolate the approach that I might take to ultimately deliver or help deliver some value. Business information or business intelligence or data visualization is something geospatial experts have been doing for a very long time. You know, we layer data, we style it in particular ways, or we even can kind of take that same, what was ultimately tabular table information, and show it in other ways via charts and things of that nature. And there's also more kind of advanced analytics, which are now becoming more prevalent, or they're starting to be more available. There's lots of resources out there to do routing type work, or to think about creating, allocating regions based upon some criteria, or doing more statistical based analytical approaches to try and gain information or provide insight into your core information, your core data. But let's talk about kind of getting, how do we create this interesting and valuable information? That's really where we want to kind of focus right now. So, it's understanding, the questions that are being asked. What are you hearing on a day-to-day basis? Who's speaking the loudest? Is the mayor in need of something? Or is there that problem that arises every year, which everyone struggles with and is spending a ton of time trying to kind of answer? Is that a place where you can plug in and provide additional value using potentially spatial techniques to kind of present information more effectively? That organization is really where you start to provide value. Thinking about, can I group things in particular ways to provide insight? Can I sort my information in a particular way to provide, some interesting insight? Like, for example, if we think about an assessing example, oftentimes you want to look at things by neighborhood. So when I group something by neighborhood, if I then look at those valuations by neighborhood, do I see any outliers? Or do I see any commonalities in all of those records? Just an example strategy. Or if I'm a DPW representative, am I looking at streets? Am I understanding where the most traffic is? Can that be the strategy to better go out and do pothole repair? That's a strategy, an example strategy for how you can organize your information. Another thing that we often, and I'm an offender, is I get hung up on the technology, but I think you really need to step away from it. Like, there are lots of approaches, lots of technologies that can help you do your job and help you visualize interesting maps, but it's more important at the outset to really understand those questions and organize your data before you get to those, selecting that technology or understanding the chloropleth, the data sets you're going to use or the field that you're going to leverage to visualize things. And finally, your data is where the value is. That core information that you are most familiar with is where I often try to focus my attention or work with others to really understand and organize effectively, because that's really where the value is at the end of the day. But we have lots of examples. I want the presentation, and Jessica and I are going to talk about a lot of example work that we've done to try and create value, with the planning department, with the assessing departments, with the DPW, and just hopefully there'll be some resonance, there'll be some things in those stories that you might be able to take away and ultimately maybe apply in your own, cities or towns or organizations. Starting with planning and building departments, here are some questions that we hear. There are many more than these, but we often just start by collecting those. And so I want to kind of really jump in and talk about a few particular customers that have had these types of challenges. We worked with the city of Portsmouth, and their challenge was they were undergoing a master planning process, as towns do, and they were really looking for a good way to present the changing landscape of what their work was actually doing. They were producing lots of hard copy maps. They were, trying to organize their information in a way during meetings that could be communicated effectively to get comment from the public. And over this long-term process, at the outset, the GIS manager was expressing some challenges, like, I'm having trouble just administering all of these maps. Can you help me do this better? Are there better ways to really get at this? And what we ended up coming up with is, all right, is there a method that we can organize your information and present it concisely spatially? And as you'll see on the slide, we came up with this line feature approach. We were trying to really pack a lot of information into a single representation, which ultimately really helped them. As they made those changes, that data structure allowed the GIS manager was easily able to update that information, and we were able to kind of make sure MapGeo was presenting the most current view for that next planning meeting. And so what ended up being an extended, almost, I think it was about a year or a year and a bit process in planning, they were able to make some really good decisions, revitalize the downtown area, and this was just a way of thinking about how to organize your information, really improved their ability to make a good decision, have productive conversations. So again, this is the standard. How can cartography help you? How do we break that down in a way that makes sense? Another example coming out of the planning sphere, relating to one of the initial questions, the Natick was having lots of challenges answering the question about what a property was zoned for. They had multiple versions of their data. They had hard copy references. That organization of data was a challenge for them, and they ultimately came up with the decision to go through a holistic approach of going back to deed source and building up year by year back to from a common operating picture what the zoning was for the city, the city of Natick. And so ultimately we ended up with a hard copy map. That's what they wanted, but that's not where the data, this project lived on. The data was quite valuable, and Jessica really, helped Natick take it further beyond that initial project. And Jessica's going to say a little bit about that.
Thanks, David. So I think MapGeo served as a really effective data delivery tool for Natick. Working with AppGeo, Natick was able to put on every single zoning overlay as an individual layer on their MapGeo site, starting from 1960 up to 2006. And as I scroll back and forth between these two slides, this is 1984 versus 1960, you can really effectively see those areas of zoning change. So being able to put these layers on their MapGeo site, turn them off with the switch of a button, a single toggle, it really enabled the zoning and planning board to highlight areas of change and inform their decisions in creating their current zoning map. And I'll turn it back to David for another example.
And so really just an example of that original data project to create that map required us building out this long record, but the data lived on. There's more value to be derived from what was originally a mapping, having a concrete final data set. It ended up providing additional investigative supports. Like, when that customer comes in, it's like, I thought I was zoned for X. And it's like, well, that zoning decision, happened here, and here's the deed reference. And so it really lives on. And so you need to sometimes that, storing your data effectively and, making it available in a variety of ways can provide value and efficiencies in those day-to-day conversations. Another fun example, I got a call from a planner who was really thinking about, what was happening in Massachusetts specifically, and just looking more nationally. They wanted to try and see if there was a way to get some more revenue for the town and be out in front of a changing landscape. They weren't GIS experts, and their GIS staff at the moment was in flux. So we just did a basic site suitability study to basically identify where there'd be appropriate medical marijuana, parcels that would be, within a certain distance or away from given properties, and ultimately had a proposal well in advance of what ultimately seems to be transpiring in Massachusetts, and then could potentially be an early recipient of some revenue. So again, thinking spatially, supporting the decision makers that are ultimately going to need to validate that, proposal that comes in the door. They're ready for that. And just another example of the value or the skill sets in GIS, what it prepares you to be able to do for your community organization. Moving on, another department we interface quite frequently with our assessing departments. Building, assessing, planning, they all mix together, but assessors and also outside representatives, we see lots of realtors using MapGeo. We see lots of community members using MapGeo, and they have a variety of questions. They're really trying to understand, more about the real estate or the property in the city or town. And so, just some more examples of how we, worked with them to really do interesting analytics. We've been kind of thinking about it even in a more broader sense. How do we go beyond the standard, assess to sale ratio? How do we do additional interesting aggregations by use code or by neighborhood or by, another aggregating mechanism to really understand how properties vary or how they're similar or how they're different. We're looking to do, be ready to do more comparable analysis, like being able to find what's the most comparable property in a town to this one that's selected. Are there methods by which we can do that effectively and accurately? I think assessing and property information is really a extremely valuable asset from a time perspective. If you were to kind of string together all of these data sets and organize it in an effective manner, there are just so many interesting trends that could be generated from that. So getting back to your data is, understanding your data and knowing it, that's the most valuable kind of asset. And just thinking about new ways to organize it can be really interesting. And then finally, doing predictive work, looking into using machine learning techniques and other approaches to try and really glean more information from that. Assessing information is something we're working on actively, and excited to have others be start asking those questions. Again, questions really drive the effort, so we're trying to stay ahead of that curve as those questions come in the door. But to a specific example, in West Hartford, Connecticut, they had a challenge. Everyone in assessing has that challenge when you do a revaluation. Local community members oftentimes question, why am I being taxed so much? What's going on here? And this individual, the assessor in West Hartford, took a very open approach. Let's just put a map out there that's going to really show what the change is relative to my neighbors. Have an open conversation about why this is happening. Using the data that you have internally to really communicate effectively what's going on. Do that in that, and from a value perspective, you're getting to the answer, or you're getting to an end solution or an answer more effectively. So potentially, if you broadcast this more widely, even avoiding counter traffic altogether, so you can get on with what you need to do day to day. So thinking about what those products are that can be deployed widely, using all of the vehicles for publishing that you have available. So not hiding anything and trying to have that open dialogue is really what West Hartford continues to do. They, the mayor comes in every year when there's a reval, and they're like, we need that map. That map helped us last year. It helped me answer questions. So finding those connection points where those decision makers that really have the budget strings, if you can show them the value of your resources, the things you're creating, that's the way to kind of really draw them in and make sure you're getting what you need, or showing your value. And then we've worked closely with the city of Malden, and Jess is going to tell us a little bit more about a very interesting heat map that we worked very closely with a client, Steve Fama. And so I'll let Jess talk a little bit about this effort.
Thanks, David. Hey, Steve, I think you're on the line. But so this example is a great example of how assessing data and using MapGeo to display your data is not just useful to internal workflows, but also to local businesses, such as Realtors. So the Realtors in Malden were curious, and they had all these questions regarding property sales, and they wanted to figure out where in Malden are kind of the property hotspots, where have the most recent sales been made and where have the most expensive sales been made. So instead of sifting through loads and loads of data and tables, we were able to answer these questions for them spatially. MapGeo is powered by Carto, and we made this really cool dynamic heat map visualization on Carto. And we were able to serve it on MapGeo and overlay it on existing parcel and property information. So with this really easy to access layer on Malden's MapGeo, we were able to help these realtors answer the questions they needed very quickly.
Thanks, Jess. Yeah, Malden's been a really great partner to work with, and there's lots of municipal examples that we could talk about, but we had to definitely touch on this one. Moving on to another audience. DPW departments have intrinsically spatial data. Their pipes, their valves, all of their utility infrastructure that they're maintaining is spatial. So you could imagine they have lots of questions, but it is a challenge to really understand where all of that's located, how it's all connected, how it's all related, storing that information. But we have lots of examples and experience working with customers and trying to really answer their questions and provide value, which is really time. The DPW, if they can save time, they can address more issues, they can make sure service isn't going down. And so that's really kind of where I want to kind of start the story that I've had an intimate kind of relationship with the city of Gloucester and their growth of this asset. Being a very old city, incorporated in 1883, they had a lot of really old assets, and so the project got started, and they wanted to find a better way to access their information. That's really what they were trying to do, and how to go about this. And how it started, they had an advocate. They had an advocate at the top of the DPW structure, and they got that type of buy-in from the very beginning. And they were focused on a long-term objective, understanding that it was going to take a long time to go through all the source documentation, all of their utility plans, and ultimately migrated into a digital space. It's sometimes uncomfortable for organizations that historically have had lots of systems that work. You know, the DPW is able to go and turn off that valve. Can they turn it off faster? Can digital resources help them do that better? That was a case that we were trying to help them make. And the organization, was willing to give that a shot for the first year. They said, let's go after, let's make this information accessible. Let's pick one that we really need and dedicate some budget to that. So what we ended up doing after getting that top down, that top actors buy-in, getting some funding established, we started building a utility app to help them find tie cards. That was really their big challenge. They would go out in the field and often struggle to find really old infrastructure. And so they're trying to just gain that additional efficiency by being able to access information from the field. This basically was a great success. They had an example on the left-hand side of the screen is this first app that we had, which basically provided that tie card information for all the homes and towns in a city. But we realized, and they realized, that there were lots of other things they wanted access to. Solving this individual's, there was about 3 to 4 utility members that were out in the field every day, and they were reporting after about 3 to 4 months of use of the first mobile utility app about saving probably 1 hour to 2 hours a day when they were in tie card, service mode. And if you do the numbers and you extrapolate out, okay, how many days is that saving? How many months is that saving? It ends up being on the order of, 2 to 6 months, depending on how many of those individuals you want to factor into your kind of return on investment equation. And that easily, over the number of years that they've been using it, makes up for what it costs them to build the application. So a very coarse ROI example, but it helped them to continue to get funding. That value that they showed and that they could articulate really allowed them to have this longer term capital budget line item for GIS to make sure the utility kind of department, the DPW department, had the funding they need to continue to do this. And every year they continue to show value from their systems. They continue to communicate broadly across multiple groups because, yes, it solves utility problems, but it's also going to help the building department. It's also going to help related departments. So using MapGeo as a platform to really communicate all of this data development work that they're doing. And then finally, it's augmented into a new platform. We now store lots of documents in MapGeo. We have what's called MapGeo Docs, and it's really a way that the city of Gloucester gets access to not just tie cards, but they also have planning resources. The health department's recently kind of gotten on board. So there's a whole host of different documents that are being shared internally behind a login. So it's an internal resource, but they ultimately imagine being more open with the community and making it more available broadly. So this is just another example of providing value, and it's been really fun working with the city, kind of helping them get to a more efficient workflow when it comes to accessing information. And at this point, I just want to turn it over to Kate, kind of wrap things up.
Sure. So I think throughout all of these, stories and use cases that we've been talking about today, the real take-home messages are, understanding how people are using GIS in your community, not just those within town hall or within city hall, but the community itself, because often that is where the greatest return on investment is happening. It's in that communication out to citizens. And then, capturing those stories and quantifying the value that they're bringing to the program and to the town or city at large. Understanding the time that is saved, understanding the good decisions that are made, understanding perhaps just the raw dollars that are saved because of some avoided cost. And then translating that into, an effective case, speaking the language of the leaders of your organization and truly making that case for the program that you're passionate about, demonstrating that value and how it benefits users right now and how it could benefit them in the future. So, as we think about all these things, I'd be interested to hear from you all, after this webinar, perhaps, what ideas do you have for the ways that the GIS is bringing the most value to your organization, and are you challenged to communicate that? Is it only the technical folks that really understand the value, or do you need help in communicating that up to those who fund and those who make decisions? I think at this point we're happy to take any questions. I don't know if Michelle, if you've gotten any in the chat window there.
Actually, don't have any questions, so I just sent out a ping to everybody. So if anyone has any questions, definitely either hit the button to raise your hand or type them in to the question window. Otherwise, we'll probably wrap it up and end this early and let you all get back to your daily jobs to prove the value of your GIS program. Well, nope.
And like I said, if we don't have questions now, we'd be happy to have follow-up from any of you. If as you think about these examples and think about how they may or may not apply to your organization, we'd love to get your feedback and see if we can, do any coaching to help you advocate for your program.
Well,
right, and up here on the screen. Oh, go ahead, Michelle. Sorry.
I was just gonna thank you everybody so much for joining us today on this webinar, and I hope it was valuable to you. And again, if you have any questions or would like to provide any feedback, or you want to talk about how we might be able to support you with advocating for your GIS program, definitely reach out. And here's an email address up on the screen also that you can contact the Spatial IQ team for anything. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.